I got the perfect idea for an intro. Are you ready?
What's that?
That's
Oh.
the intro. And welcome back, everybody, to the best music podcast on all sides of the earth. This podcast is called Hey, Listen to This, and it is hosted by two dashingly good-looking men who share the same middle name. I am the one. I am the only. I am the undisputed Ryan James Kearns.
And I am the one, the only, the often disputed Matthew James Durzick. And for those of you who don't know what we do on Hey, Listen to This, basically we go week by week, album by album, look at each other and say, hey, listen to this. And we talk about some of our favorite albums or some current albums or albums that may have some sort of cultural relevance. And speaking of that, Ryan, what did we do last week?
So, last week we kicked off our DEI initiative here at Hey, Listen to This. We believe in DEI here. And we are taking the opportunity of, February, the month that we are currently in, to, really embrace Black History Month. And we kicked it off with a bang last week with covering Beyonce's Lemonade. And while I was pretty familiar with the album thanks to, my listening of one of my favorite podcasts, Dissect, going over the album track by track, I had an absolute blast of a time, revisiting that album and, just really taking a look at Beyonce from a more critical lens in my own eyes. But yeah, I had a great time, diving into Lemonade.
I did too, and it's one of those rare moments. I mean, because we kind of both knew going into that episode that it was going to be a highly rated album, but it's one of those rare times where our opinion of the album got better as the show went along. So that's not a usual thing that happens on. I mean, it happens once in a while on this show, but I was not expecting it with that to be going from great to even greater. And for those of you who want to find out just how that happened, the episode is up and you can listen to it right now.
So, yeah, it was one of those times that we did a review that I'm glad that we do these episodes, because there was one specific track in question where you directly influenced my rating going up just a half of a tick, just because of the nerdy aspects of it. But moving on from Beyonce to another prominent, African American artist slash band in history. Matt, what are we covering this week?
So this week we are going back to the year of 1971. And we're going to talk about the band Sly and the Family Stone and their album called There's a Riot Going On. Now, for those of you wondering what is a Sly and the Family Stone, that's actually a pretty good question because it's been a hot minute since they have been in the cultural pantheon. But for a hot second back in the late 60s, they were seen as these revolutionaries, this blended group of black and white musicians who were making this very high-end, high-strung, up-tempo funk R&B that had a bit of a sunnier, more vibrant panache that anyone else had had. I mean, we're talking about songs that are still popular to this day, like Everyday People, Dance to the Music, I Want to Take You Higher, Hot Fun in the Summertime, stuff that still stands the test of time. But with the end of the 60s being what it was, and the end of the 60s ending how the 60s ended, with the likes of Altamont and the raging chaos of the Vietnam War still going on, things were getting pretty dark at the turn of the start of the 70s, and Sly Stone was no exception to this because, like many a rock star before him, he turned to drugs. And with the drugs kicked in, so did a wild, I'm not going to say downfall, but a wild twist in the way that he made his music and how he even performed his music, because he became notorious for missing shows. I think there was one tour in like 1970 where he missed like a third of the dates just by not showing up. So there's that, and then he was also involved, getting more involved with the Black Panthers, and they were sort of pushing him to make his music more blacker. And all of this leads to this sort of long-awaited moment before Christmas of 1971. It's like, okay, it's been like a year and a half since you've released a single. It's been a full 2 since you've released an album. What's going on? And then comes this album, There's a Riot Going On. And it turned out to be pretty successful considering how long it had been for Sly. It hit number 1. But did it sound quite the same as the songs before it? Not necessarily, and we'll get into why. And before we get into the album proper, my experience with Sly and the Family Stone is probably very similar to a lot of people of the millennial age, which is probably heard them once or twice on oldies radio. You know, those songs I mentioned earlier coming up time and time again. And then just sort of going from there. I know roughly around high school is when I started getting into like reading Rolling Stone, and they had albums like Stand from 1969 ranked high. I was like, oh, well, that's the one with Everyday People on it. Let me listen to it. And I remember really liking that. And then came this album, which again, I'm not going to spoil anything. It's different.
So, yeah, my history with Sly and the Family Stone, it's pretty brief in that I knew that they were a band, and like the one song that you mentioned, which was "Dance to the Music," like I know that song, but that's basically it. Like, and even like expand, like you know, talking about this record as a whole, and just my relationship with kind of music that he's bringing to this record as compared to like what my usual MO is. This is another album that's very much not in my wheelhouse, in that you're gonna get a lot of funk elements here, but yeah, like I can name you. I'll be honest with you. I can't really name off the top of my head like a album that's very similar to this in terms of just bringing like pure funk, relying on the instrumentals more so, but like, you know, not to spoil so much of like, you know, the album that we're literally about to cover, but like, you know, I figured that would be a good context for like, you know, my relationship to the artist and the genre that he's bringing to the table.
Yes, and before we go one more step into the first song, which is Love and Hate, or Hate, I actually own the vinyl copy of this record, complete with the mock American flag with the suns instead of stars atop a black backdrop instead of a blue backdrop. The red and white stripes still the same for some reason. And in the notes, the liner notes that I have here, I'm going to tell you what they tell me the album is. There's a Riot Going On by Sly and the Family Stone. What it is: Sly and the Family Stone. It's about time. It's about space. It's about ups and downs caused by life in general. It's about the music. It's about the people who are interested. It's about running away. It's about love and hate. It's about brave and strong. It's about smiling just like a baby. It's about a poet. It's a family affair. It's so complex, words get in the way. Just look at the faces on the outside and the inside of this album. They'll tell you. Thank you again. That's in the notes of the album itself.
That sounds like, I mean, no disrespect to like, you know, Sly and his Family Stone there, but that just sounds like, you know, some beatnik stuff right there.
It does. It's a little bit of beatnik mixed with a little bit of the waiter at the restaurant who doesn't want to be there, just handing you your food and saying, okay, here's what it is. We're serving it on a plate. Don't ask questions. Enjoy.
All right. So I think I'm ready to dive into this record. Are you?
I am ready as well. And let's kick things off with the first track, which is Love and Hate. And it's not spelled the way you think. It's Luv, letter N, Haight. And the hate there is a reference to Haight-Ashbury, where it was sort of seen as the ground zero for hippie counterculture in San Francisco back in the 1960s, where this album sort of stems from. And right at the top, you get this really nice bass and this really nice funk going on between drummer Greg Errico and bassist Larry Graham. Sly's guitar is in there as well, doing the little wah-wah thing, the wow, wow, wow. And then it kicks into this chorus, this very basic chorus of just chanting. And it does a really good job of having a hook without words. And then you get to the lyrics, which really don't exist on this song, because outside of the verses where it's being sung, as I grow up, I'm growing down, and when I'm lost, I know it will be found. And then the other one, which is another place, another time, and when I realize I'm still all mine. The rest of the lyrics veer between feel so good, don't want to move, feel so good, cannot move, feel so good, I want to move. And that's pretty much the entire song for 4-ish minutes. Now, I don't think it takes a Shakespearean linguist to realize what this song's about. It's probably about drugs. Because when you got the contrast of feel so good, don't want to move, to feel so good, I want to move, feel so good, I cannot move, that's kind of a dead giveaway as to what it is. The lyrics are a bit more optimistic, but at the same time, it's pretty cut and dry what this is. That being said, I really do like the song as an opener, because it does have such a relatively vibrant, if somewhat disjointed vibe to it. Again, the rhythm section is fantastic. The chanting chorus is great. And yeah, it's not in my top 3, which is kind of surprising because for a long time this probably would have been my number 1. But as it stands right now, this song is a very good opener, probably in the top half of my album for me.
So my opinion, like, I share a lot of, like, the same thoughts that you have about this track here. I mean, it is a solid opener, and for full disclosure, in terms of, like, ranking with this album, I have a top song and I have a bottom song. That's it.
Wow.
And, like, when we get to the end of the record, I'll explain why. But, like, specifically looking at Love and Hate, I, like, one thing that I did appreciate here, at least what I was able to catch, with this track, was it was almost like at the beginning you get those vocal hits where, like, like they're crescendoing up, and, like, they're kicking off the track, and then, like, you get, like, the vocal lines doing something different. I did appreciate that. I did like the vocal performances. Like, the lyrics, like you said, aren't, like, much to write home about. Like, feel so good, don't want to move. Okay, we get it, Bob. But the vocal screams that occur in this track are pretty decent. I did appreciate that. You were right on the money with talking about the backing band. The bass is doing a great job. I love the wah-wah guitar that's going on in the background. That was a highlight for me. And yeah, just overall, like, this was a great way to open up the album, because it properly introduces the listener to, like, what is to, like, essentially come within the record. You're gonna get, like, funky instrumentals alongside vocals that aren't really meant to convey, like, a message, as opposed to just add, like, another instrument to the mix, which is, like, at least in my opinion, what funk music is as a whole.
Yeah, and this is about as funky as it gets. Or I should say, it's about as pure as funk could get. Because, once again, you really don't have the lyrical content so much as just the band and the rhythm trying to hold everything together, which it does very well. And honestly, for as lacking as it is in lyrics, the vocal performances are good too. Like, it's a combination of this sounds really good, and also this sounds like they didn't have anything to go on, so they're just kind of jamming right now. And spoiler alert, that's not the last time we're going to be saying this on this album. It's a very, we'll explain, but I think I am ready to move on to the next track, which is Just Like a Baby.
So, just like a baby, we get immediately like another side of Sly and the Family Stone. Like this is taking the funk levels and like dialing it back a great deal. This is more exploring the R&B, like more of the, like, for lack of a better genre description, like a doo-wop kind of song, where it's just like you get the keys that lay out the track right out of the gate in a very effective manner. And the I one thing I was taken back here by was how the vocals were recorded, because in the previous track it almost seems like a live jam session. The vocals here, it almost seems like, I don't know. I didn't look into like how the actual production was handled, but like it just seems like the vocals were recorded separately, or there was more attention given to them because they're a lot more pronounced in this track. And one moment that I really did like in Just Like a Baby on the vocal front is just, we talked about the screams in the previous track. You get those moments here, but it's almost like a quiet kind of scream. And like I did like that a good bit. Overall, the song is kind of, it reminds me of a bluesy kind of track as well. And another, like, um, for another, like, musical kink for me is whenever instrumentals echo like vocal lines, and you get that here with the guitars echoing the vocals lines, like, in various moments in the track. Overall, though, Just Like a Baby, it's a great way to transition out of love and hate into like, oh hey, like this is just not going to be a funk record.
I kind of see where you're going with it. I actually thought this track sort of downplayed the momentum of Love and Hate. I don't like this track as much. Not a bottom track for me, and for the record, I have a top 3 and a bottom 0, so that's my cards on the table for this particular album. But I agree, it does present that sort of slow shuffle groove that is a little more subdued, but definitely in the pocket. And as far as those vocals, I heard the pronunciation of it as well. And I did look a little bit into why the vocals on a lot of these tracks sound as they do. And a lot of times, Sly, as drugged out as he was, would just like lie in bed with like a tape recorder and record his vocals from there. And somehow it went from his bed to the recording studio to the album to record stores everywhere. And also, it should be mentioned, and this is going to be the case for most of this album, there is a good chunk of overdubbing. So that's why a lot of rhythms, particularly on the drums, are going to sound a little weird and disjointed and very, very dense. I was gonna say deep, but dense is probably the better term there, because there's just stuff everywhere, for lack of a better term. Aside from that, the lyrics here, once again, not a whole lot to write home about. Doesn't seem as meaningful as the lyrics on Love and Hate, because you have, just like a baby inside a little big man, everything is new. Just like a baby, come to find out I'm a whole lot like you too. And so Sly's basically philosophizing that, hey, everyone who comes into this world, we're all the same, and we're all trying to become this one thing, but ultimately nothing's going to change. So it kind of comes off a little pessimistic, and it more or less feels like a bunch of ideas jotted down on a piece of paper, which is not a bad thing because that's how most songs are written. But yeah, I thought the song was all right. I like the keyboard work on here, which wasn't super flashy, but every once in a while you get those little runs that are happening, which are kind of nice. But yeah, this is an album track for me, but it's a solid album track.
And all credit to you for finding a little bit more meaning into the lyrics, because, like, I'll be honest with you, like, I wasn't really digging the lyrics so much. I was just like, oh, like they're not like for me they were a non-factor. But yeah, credit to you for like providing context into there. So awesome job on that front, man.
I appreciate that. But going from Just Like a Baby onto the next track, which is Poet. And once again, I mean, you got another really tight groove, bit more of a traditional funk, if you will. Very driven by the keyboard. Right at the gate, you get that and that sort of drives the whole song. How little of it there is, and once again, it sort of feels like the mix is very off-putting and sort of very DIY in a sense. There's really not a whole lot there. I think this is the first time on record that we have a drum machine, or it might be, because Sly was also using a very primitive version of that to record a lot of the beats, because he would just like hit a preset and the drums would be there for him. Lyrically, it's pretty good because you have lyrics like "My only weapon is my pen and the frame of mind I'm in. I'm a songwriter, a poet, and the things I flash on every day, they all reflect in what I say. I'm a songwriter, I'm a poet, I'm a songwriter, oh yeah, poet." And by the way, that's the entire lyrics of the song. So, once again, it feels a bit more fragmented than an actual, like, fully developed song. And you gotta remember, too, this was at a time in not only which Sly had released a lot of songs that were a lot more structurally typical of the time, but this is also a time in which the underground spirit of the late 60s had fragmented. Pop music was becoming a lot lighter and much more back to sort of very simplistic, slick styles, while rock was diving more into the heavy metal of like Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath. But in both cases, you had fully formed, recognized songs being released by major artists, whether it be Black Sabbath on one end or like the Carpenters on the other end. Sly is saying, screw all that. This is how I feel the music should sound, and I'm going with it. And he's putting it out there and just hoping that, I don't even know if he's hoping. He's just, praying that, people will listen, and they did. But this is definitely more on the lines of a piece of song than an actual song itself. It's not a bad song. Like, it's got a good groove. The lyrics are fine, but it definitely feels little more jammy, even compared to the first two songs on this album.
So, my relationship with I'm gonna take a step back from talking about Poet here for a second, and just to there was a thought that just kind of hit me while you were talking. My relationship with like jam bandy kind of music, the Grateful Dead or Fish, I've never really gone into them because I just thought, oh hey, this is just pure vibes, there's nothing here for me. Like maybe if I put it on in the background, while I'm playing some Mortal Kombat or doing taxes, maybe I can really enjoy it. However, with Poet here, and you were drawing comparisons to Led Zeppelin and the rock music and metal music at the time. Maybe what Sly was going for was, hey, we are just a really good group of musicians, and we really don't need to have really elaborate song structures. We just need to show off our ability to just develop an effective groove within songs. And one thing I noticed, specifically within Poet, and it goes throughout a couple of moments with the rest of the album, it's just a lot of my thoughts are the instrumentation is great. I was taken back by just the specific moments here or there that, oh hey, in Poet here, I thought the bass line was doing a great job. The keys are also doing great. And also I really did appreciate the moments where the staccato hits occur. I thought that was a nice touch. Is it recorded the best? Not really, but let's face it, based on the context that you were giving me, they weren't really working with all that much in the woodshed. But overall though, like is Poet like a mind blowing song for me? Not really, but I really did appreciate the instrumental from like I didn't talk about the wah wah guitar that is kicking off the track. I thought that was an excellent touch as well. Like overall, like it's a really good solid jam session of the song, and especially at the end where it's just an extended jam session. Like I've talked about in the Cure review that we did that it's kind of nice whenever a band on the instrumental front is allowed to breathe and explore stuff. Do Sly and his Family Stone do that in Poet at the end? I would say like they just jam and they vibe. Do they explore stuff? Not really, but it's a solid song.
It is a solid song. Again, I would definitely put in the category of album track once again. And to your point about the comparisons of like the Grateful Dead and Fish, the difference with those bands, and I'll throw in the Allman Brothers as well, is that with those bands you had sort of a focus on like solos, and while a lot of it was vibes, a lot of it was also, technical skill. Jerry Garcia is considered to be one of the greatest guitarists of all time. Dwayne Allman's considered to be one of the greatest guitarists of all time. Trey Anastasio, to Fish fans and probably some others, considered one of the best guitarists of all time. But they were relying on their technical skills along with the vibes. Here, it's purely vibes. Like, they're just going with what they feel, and it doesn't even have to be a long song. It doesn't even have to be a fully developed, like, chorus, verse structure. They're just going with what they feel, and Sly was going with what he feels, and that's how we ended up with Poet. So it's a respectable situation that, again, sounded unlike really anything that was on vinyl at that time.
So I feel like I'm ready to move on to Family Affair. If you are,
I am.
all right. So for the first time in the record, at least up into this moment, like the lyrics here with Family Affair actually take a stranglehold on the context of the the song itself. So it's a very depressing song if you really kind of take a look at it. Like the opening verse talks about two children, one that grows up to be someone that you just love, and the other one just grows up to be somebody you just love to burn. Like that's kind of dark. And then like the second verse talks about the mother's relationship with the two children, and then the third verse is kind of like a little disconnected from the first one. Maybe it's providing more context into like how the married couple came to be in the first place, being like, oh hey, they're still checking each other out. But and then the fourth verse has my favorite lyric in the song here, and it goes, "You can't cry because you look broke down, but you're crying anyways because you're all broke down." So you think about how as a society you don't want to look weak, and crying is a sign of looking weak to people, but you're you have to, in this case, the person is crying because they have nothing left, so they have to let it out. So I thought that was a good probably the strongest lyrics in the album so far for me. And even taking a step back from the lyrical front and going into the song front, I did like the vocal performance. It's not so much in the it's not one of my favorite performances, but it's solid in its own right. I did like the backing vocals doing the refrain of "It's a family affair." Also apologies to the listeners out there who had to hear me screech that out. And the backing band is doing this what I almost I couldn't describe it in any other way other than a galloping kind of effect. I thought that was a nice touch. But overall, though, Family Affair, like if maybe on a different day, maybe if like there was like a like one more thing that could have put it over the edge, it could have been like another top song for me. But I dig it nonetheless.
So this track, oddly enough, was the first of I think 3 hits off of this album, and it was the biggest hit. It actually went to number one. So all things that we've talked about so far, the drugs, the drum machines, the band members going in and out of the lineup, which I had not mentioned up until this point, all of it somehow pushed to this point where this single hit number one. And you talk about that galloping effect on the rhythm. To me, it's about as close to funky as you're ever going to get, because because between the drum machine and the wah-wah guitar and whatever else is going on, the overdubbing, it literally is the musical equivalent of boots being in the mud. And I mean that as a compliment, because it's just so like almost like warbly funky. You mentioned the hook, which is being sung wonderfully. And those lyrics, like you mentioned, are really good. They have a very super passive aggressive tone to them, where Sly is sort of trying to sound sunny, but he's really not trying to do it. Like, he's just trying to like shove it in everybody's face. Like, whenever he sings "Newlyweds" a year ago, but you're still checking each other out, like he's just, it almost seems like the drunk guy at the party that's really about to make things super awkward, because he's having a great time, but at the same time he's about to reveal some things you don't want to be revealed. So that's the whole vibe I get from this song. The guitar is fantastic. It's very underrated. Like, you're not even thinking about the guitar until the very end, when it just sort of kicks in a high gear, that final chorus, that and yeah, all that to say that as basic as it sounds, this is my favorite song on the album.
I can totally dig that, man. And I'm gonna still lock in my rating for the album as a whole, but yeah, like it's a solid song. Definitely a standoutish song for me, and I think I kind of knew that it was a single while doing like my research, but like in preparation for this review here, I was more just sitting with the record, seeing what I thought about it, how I was vibing with some tracks, and this, like, at least like out of the get go, this was one of the tracks that really stood out to me. But yeah, it's a solid track in it, and I feel like I'm ready to move on to Africa Talks to You, the Asphalt Jungle.
Yes, Africa Talks to You, the Asphalt Jungle, which is technically not the final track of the first side of the album, but it kind of is, and we'll explain why in a second. So, once again, you have that drum machine that you heard on Family Affair going a little slower and a bit more primitive, and you have the basic guitar at the beginning that sound like they're in a tight groove with the drum machine. So once again, the rhythm section sounds great. It sounds great, and it has throughout this entire album so far. And then you get to the actual singing, and the verses sound like rhymes more so than they actually do lyrics. Like, when you get stuff like, "Must be a rush for me to see a lazy, a brain he meant to be, cop out, he's crazy, and who's believing who's doing the fishing, do what you want to do, or can you keep on wishing?" If the rhythm section wasn't so good, I'd probably dive a lot more into how not good those lyrics are. But again, all the context that we've talked about so far has to go in. Like, if they were super focused and super like in it, and everybody was clean, and everybody was, happy to be having a job, and everything was just hunky-dory, there's no excuse to get away with these lyrics. But again, there were drugs involved. There were politics involved. There was laziness involved. And I think we've all had those moments in our lives where we're just kind of like, we're stuck in this rut of not feeling like we can get our best out there, and we have to put something out there, so that's kind of what we come up with. That's what this song feels like lyrically. But musically, it sounds really good because you have, again, the backing band sounding pretty much, in lock for roughly 8 minutes. And then towards the end of the song, when Sly and the Family Stone are just singing Timber, to, various like wails and degrees, you can sort of get the more amplified effect of them just sort of jamming out, vibing, and whether they're vibing or not for all the right reasons is certainly to be debated. But I thought this track was pretty good. Not in my top three, but it's a solid way to quote unquote close, even though it's not closing out side A of the record.
So yeah, I'm glad that you kind of pointed out the interesting structure of the lyrics because I could have tried to do some deep diving of my own, but this might be showing my own growth as like a music reviewer in our show here, but like the website that we often cite as our research and that helps us gain context for our reviews here is genius.com. But Genius, if I'm not mistaken, was trying to equate this song here to the African American experience during the time, and I was just trying to use my own independent mind to be like, okay, how are these bars lining up? And then I decided they don't line up. I'm a strong independent man. No disrespect to what that person was saying, but they're wrong.
Right.
But going into the instrumental front, because you absolutely were you're on the money with the instrumentals, doing a solid job here. Right out of the gate, I did like the guitar kicking off the song. It was a decent guitar solo. And even in the verses, the interplay between the vocals and the guitar, where it almost seems as the vocals were ending one phrase and the guitar was complementing that phrase. I thought that was a great touch. Solid chorus, nothing to really write home about. And then the instrumental breaks that occur, that was one thing that kind of stood out to me with this song. In the second instrumental break, I love the interplay between the bass and the guitars. That was a nice moment. And outside of the lyrical front, I did like the vocals. They were super solid, especially on the chorus. Whenever they were coming up and hitting those emphasized moments. And another moment that I did like here was in the third instrumental break, you get the bass that is featured, and it is super solid, my dude. I was actually kind of taken back by the choice of focusing in on the bass, because it's not enough. I know within funk music, the bass is a very foundational instrument, but for it to be feature prominently, I was just oh, okay, that's kind of cool. And then the instrumental section at the end of the track grooves well, because it just goes through different moments, and you get different instruments popping out here or there doing their own thing. But yeah, so to echo your thoughts, Africa Talks to You, the Asphalt Jungle lyrics, what are you doing? Instrumentals, 2 thumbs up.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. Yeah, it's once again, the vibes are more or less dictating the terms of what we're listening to, and I appreciate the fact that you sort of called out, anyone trying to decipher these lyrics as anything super meaningful, when in reality they're kind of not, or at the very least, they're only meaningful to the members of the band and no one else, which I've talked about before. If there's something that you guys are referencing that you think is funny, but none of us are gonna get, don't say it out loud. That's not necessary. Ironically enough, though, to close out side one, and I'll sort of just take a hold of this. because you mentioned Genius.com, is the title track, There's a Riot Going On, which on the album pressings is listed at 0 minutes and 0 seconds, but if you own it on CD, it's actually 4 seconds of nothing but pure silence. And I was just curious, because the first run through I did look up at the lyrics on Genius, and this is the only track in which I got any sort of insight as to why this track is 0 minutes and 0 seconds. And according to Genius.com, it's because Sly Stone didn't want there to be riots. So if there's a riot going on and it's 0.00 seconds long, then there are no riots. Which, it's philosophical. I dig it. Not 100% sure if that's true, but it makes sense to me.
Yeah. I mean, like, this is not a political podcast whatsoever, so I'm not going to get into the stance of, oh, hey, everyone should just join hands and, like, sing Kumbaya. Like, in today's day and age, I'm not even going to go down that rabbit hole on a recorded platform such as this. But, like, I thought that was, like, at least, like, for that, like, there's two sides that you can land on with, like, Sly's inclusion of this track here. It's either A, oh, he's just being incredibly lazy, or B, oh, that's actually kind of cool. I land on it's kind of cool.
I do too. It's a nice little touch. It's especially if, again, I appreciate the meaning that Genius went with, but it almost feels like it has a bit more of a deeper meaning or a bit more of a chaotic feeling when you don't know what it means. That, it's listed on the track, but it's not a track at all, and I'm sure people who bought this album were probably like flipping the record over twice, 3 times over, trying to figure out where the hell the track was. So that must have been fun for them. But yeah,
they were. Sorry, they were trying to figure out where is the riot.
Exactly, where's the riot? What's going on? Why don't I hear anything? And why is my record player stopped? But yeah, now that's an interesting, sneaky way to cause chaos, and I very much appreciate it. So before we move on to Brave and Strong to kick off side B, Ryan, I got a question for you.
What is that, Matthew?
If people are listening to us jabber on about Sly and the Family Stone, and they think, these guys sound pretty good, I wonder what else they got, and they want to check us out, what is the best way that they can support us continuing to talk about all these different albums?
So the number one way that they can help support you and I, continue on with our musical journey here throughout 2025 and like the years beyond, is just make sure that you stay up to date with all the episodes and like, anytime that we release a new episode, you check it out, and if it's something that isn't in your musical palette, cool. Like, actually go on the journey with us, because, like, like I alluded at the start of the review here, like, this record that we're talking about, not in my musical palette. But, I mean, I'm expanding my journey. I'm becoming a better music lover as a byproduct of this review. And then another thing that they can do is just make sure that we get picked up by the algorithm gods. So whatever podcasting platform that you're listening to us on right now, make sure that you do whatever action that is necessary that shows the platform that, hey, we're a podcast worth like, picking up. Like, subscribe. Make sure that you leave a positive review. If you're listening to us on the YouTubes, make sure that you like the video, leave a comment in the comment section down below about like what your thoughts are of the review. And then bonus points if you go onto our social medias. We have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have Threads, and we have Blue Sky. I'm working on Truth Social, but, I can't bring myself to actually get onto that platform. But, and the tagline for that, to find us on all those platforms, is TT Hey Listen. And if you're listening to us as a if you're listening to us right now and you are wanting to have us cover a specific album by a specific artist, the best way that you guys can do that is, email us at ttheylisten@gmail.com. We will happily do any listener suggestions in terms of album reviews. I think it would be a fun episode. But yeah, that basically covers the wide gamut of all the ways that they can help support us. Keep on keeping on.
And to all of you who have supported me and Ryan so far throughout this many episode journey, I think we're on like episode 64, 65 of just album reviews so far. We thank you because, again, we're just two dudes. We're not supported by any major podcast network or recording this from any major studio. We're just, two guys who love talking about music. And in that spirit, we shall carry on with There's a Riot Going On by Sly and the Family Stone. Side B kicks off with Brave and Strong, and Ryan, I'll throw it to you.
So, with Brave and Strong, we very much get back into pure funk vibes with the back half of the record. The horns work well here. I love how they interplay with the vocals and guitars. I love how there's been many instances within the album so far where like it just almost seems like on the surface, if you're not really paying attention to the music, like tracks like this can come off as like, oh hey, like they're talking about being brave and strong and surviving, and it's a nice funky track. But like the way that some of the instrumentals are able to communicate with each other, it's almost like they're having a conversation, and I'm always a fan of that. That always is a musical kink for me. Just leaning into that that tag right there. The other instrumental part that I really did like is the bass guitar. Once again, the driving feel that it has here, like it's very nice. The vocals are great. Like, probably, in terms of vocal performances, probably in the upper half of the record with, especially, like, how they sound on the screams. Like, I thought that was a nice touch. But, yeah, overall, though, Brave and Strong, it's a nice, great funk track to get us back into the momentum of the record. And I also like the message that was delivered in the chorus, and it's simply the brave and strong survive. So, I really do like Brave and Strong. It's not my favorite track on the record, and I will note that we haven't come across my least favorite or my favorite track, and we are in the back half of the album yet. So it's going to be interesting to see how things line up here.
It is going to be interesting to see how things line up. I agree with you that the groove on this track is good, and that the lyrics are pretty simplistic and solid with, it being, the brave and strong survive, and when you walk, know where you're walking. When you talk, know who you're talking to. It's basically Sly saying, be careful, be strong, and watch your back, which, again, is very in tune with the start of the 1970s, particularly in the racial identities of the time. But if I'm being completely honest, this is not one of the more memorable tracks for me off the album. It's probably the one I would probably consider giving a re-listen to find out, the quote-unquote musical conversation that you're talking about. Because I don't know why, but this is right there with Poet as probably the two tracks on the album that sort of least hit me. Like, they're not bad tracks. I'm not going to say that they're bad tracks or that they offend me or I heard something that I thought was wrong. But they just, when I think about this album, it's probably one of the lesser tracks in that regard. But it's still a solid track being for what it is. The groove's good, like you said, the lyrics are good, and it does sort of have a strong... It's sort of a nice compliment piece to Love and Hate from side one, how that kicked off with a more somewhat up-tempo type of vibe. This is kind of that same category, although I don't think quite as pronounced. But still, it's still alright.
Yeah, and, to be honest with you, Brave and Strong was one of the tracks, I didn't really catch up to, and to be honest with you, the like my experience with Brave and Strong, like at least from the first couple listens of the record, it kind of just zoomed on past me, and it wasn't until like I was really listening to the record in my car and in my earbuds where I was just like, oh, okay, I'm catching up on little moments here or there. But yeah, I totally can respect what this track is and like even just the overall thoughts you had as well. So you ready to move on to "You Caught Me Smiling"?
Yes, You Caught Me Smiling, which is another song that was released as a single and just barely missed the top 40. I think it landed at number 41 or 42. But you can hear why this was at least released as a single. It's got a bit more of a higher, more vibrant, slightly more optimistic vibe, particularly on the hook where, again, they're saying, "You caught me smiling again." But even that is cut by Sly just like screaming into the microphone at any random point, where it's just like, "Yeah!" It's like a drive-by screaming at you. And realistically, the lyrics aren't much to write home about. Again, hanging loose because you ain't used to seeing me turning on. I'll be gone and it won't take you long to climb a tree about me. I ain't down, I'll be around to carry on. In my pain, I'll be saying to take your hand. And once again, those are the entire lyrics of the song. But once again, it's a good song mainly because, sort of like with Family Affair, the lyrics do carry a passive-aggressive tone to them. And what I really dug about this track, not just the backing band sounding solid as usual, but towards the end of the track where the horns carry out two different lines that are similar but have different key changes. I really like that part. That was probably the highlight of the song for me, where it goes ba 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 ba. Like that was really cool. And I really don't have any other notes to add to this song aside from that because again, it's a solid track, not in my top 3, but it's a nice contrast to sort of the more I wouldn't say militant, but more jagged Brave and Strong.
The section that you mentioned, where at the end, where the horns were just doing like all these different parts at the end, like I noted that. Really did like how in that section the guitars and the bass were laying down such a great foundation that allowed the horns to springboard off and do their own thing. I thought that was a really good thing. For me, like the only other thing I can add to the context of "You Caught Me Smiling" that you didn't already lay down is just the band's ability to play with dynamics pretty well. Like I love the horn crescendos and just the overall momentum builds that were executed here. And the vocals as well, like they were able to play with dynamics pretty well. Like you kind of alluded to the drive-by screams that you said that Sly was executing. I love that terminology. But yeah, overall though, "You Caught Me Smiling." It's a solid time. It kind of reminds me, to be honest with you, like a mixture of Family Affair and like Brave and Strong, where like you get like a solid rememberable refrain, and then you get like instrumental moments that stand out. If the song "Africa Talks to You," the Asphalt Jungle, like had like at least a solid refrain like this one had, like it would have instantly been like one of my favorite songs on the album. But like overall, like "You Caught Me Smiling," it's a good time.
It is a good song, and once again, I can kind of understand why it was released as a single. And in a different timeline, it probably would have climbed a little higher on the charts, but not meant to be. And I think a reason for that, and it's kind of surprising how Family Affair even got to number 1, is that even on these songs, it feels like the typical structure or the typical like dynamics that are found in most pop songs aren't even there. Like even on this song, like it does feel like verse, goes chorus verse, instrumental breakdown, chorus verse, instrumental breakdown. But even then, there's a vibe to it that feels atypical. Like there's a vibe that feels like this isn't what should be on the radio, but it sounds pleasant enough to get there. And so they're sort of like testing the limits of seeing how much they can get away with by, tweaking the positions of things a little bit. But yeah, I am ready to move on to the next track, which is Time.
So, with Time, we get another, dynamic shift. Like, this is another slower song, but probably not nearly as much as of a Whiplash going from Love and Hate to Just Like a Baby, because, like, You Caught Me Smiling, there was moments where the horns were popping off, but there was a little bit more of a gradual decline from at least the start of the back half of the record. The vocal performances here, they were solid. It kind of reminds me of my appreciation of, John Mayer's Gravity, where just everything is just so tight and in the pocket on the instrumental front. I was really taken back by that. Just the overall, staccato sections that are executed by the instruments here, another nice musical moment. The band is again playing with dynamics pretty well here, and just another thing that I did like on the instrumental front is the wah wah guitar. I really did appreciate what it was doing with how it was hitting its marks. Lyrically, I couldn't tell you one lyric off the record, only because it wasn't really all that memorable for me. I'm even looking right now and just trying to see if I can do a quick drive-by of it. But yeah, no. It almost seems like another nonsensical mishmash of words. So overall though, Time, it's a good time for me. Pun slightly intended. It's an album track where it's just am I gonna go back to it? Not really, but if it's on, am I gonna not vibe to it? I mean I am gonna vibe to it. It's a good time.
I'm kind of right there with you. I might appreciate the track a little bit more than you do. It's not in my top 3, but yeah, I do find it, again, fascinating that you're using the term the band was, sounding very tight, because this might be the one track on the entire album where the band may not exist, because you have the drum machine, you have the keyboards that are sort of, going in and out with each other, and you have Sly. So I'd say probably at least 80% of this track in some way or another is Sly himself and nobody else. But those details really have never been fully fleshed out, or at the very least, I have not fully fleshed them out for this review. But that being said, this song is drenched in reverb. And it adds a nice effect to the keyboards, particularly in some sections of the song where it feels like everything's being pulled back and they're almost in space in a sense. And Sly's vocals are very echoey in a good way. And lyrically, I pretty much agree with you, with one exception, which is at the very end, where Sly says, "They say time is the answer, but I don't believe them." And you're just kind of like, oh, well, why not? And that's how the song ends. So you're just kind of wondering, okay, well, what does this guy mean by saying, all these things that time is, and that they say that it's the answer, I don't believe them. I mean, that's just basically a guy saying, you can't tell me what to do in the most pseudo-philosophical way possible. I like this track quite a bit. It's probably one that I've gone back to maybe a couple times before, but it's not a super top track for me. As far, I'd probably put this in the top half of the album ultimately.
So yeah, we have 3 tracks left, man.
3 tracks left, and I have 2 more to go in my top 3. You have yet to reveal anything, so let's rumble. Let's move on into the depths and find out who's fighting who and where. And we'll start with Spaced Cowboy. And I'm going to take a wild prediction and say that this is your least favorite of the three.
I'm gonna hold my cards close to my chest until it's my turn to talk. So
Okay.
you you kick off the discussion here, though.
Okay. So this track is just, we come off the end of time where Sly in his drugged out manifesto is saying, I don't believe time is the answer, going into this very almost comical type of song where he's yodeling everywhere. He's basically making a theme song for a Western he would see on TV. But again, it is just drenched in reverb, it's drenched in overdubs. The vocals seem all weird and out of place. Like when the lyrics kick in of I can't say it more than once because I'm thinking twice as fast, like those vocals seem like so low, and then Sly just barges in with yodelay, yodelay, and the lyrics aren't great. The yodeling can probably get annoying to the wrong ear. And honestly, I just think the song's funny. Like, this is just a goofy, weird, bizarre, stupid song. Because I can just imagine, like, Sly, like, sitting in his bed, watching Bonanza with a tape recorder in his hand, being like, oh yeah, this is good stuff. This is real good stuff. And particularly the part that keeps this anywhere from a bottom track to me is where it gets to the double time chorus where it's just drum machine and Sly yodeling even higher. Like, you're trying to make a Western, like, outlaw song with a drum machine and a R&B band. What is with you right now? Like, this song is almost so bad it's good, but it's not so outlandish that I'm going to put it anywhere in a top or bottom category, because the down parts of the track, particularly the opening where it just kind of drags on, and the back end where it kind of drags along too, doesn't really, help matters a lot. This is definitely an album track I would probably put in the bottom half of the album, but it's not a least favorite track, because again, it's to me, the humor of it is recognized, and I can respect what Sly was going for, even if it comes into some rather, because the one other thing I'll say about it is that the fact that he's having such a good time making this goofy track, considering the circumstances that created this album, does have a bit of a darkness in its own right. Like, this seems like the part of the party where things are just like, okay, he's way out there, I'm not sure if we should call for help, and that's kind of what the song feels like in a sense.
So, my relationship with Space Cowboy, it's fluctuated. Like, on my first drive-by of the record, I I I, I was taken back by the yodels, because I was just like, oh, those are awesome, man. I really, really like that. And then, like, as, like, repeated listens happened, my appreciation for the track went down, down. Now, to be fair, like, this is my least favorite track on the album. Like, and it is for the yodels, because, like, you get the whiplash, because they are interesting, but it's such a whiplash going from the yodels to, like, what I could best describe as spoken word parts, because there's not really, like, much vocal pronunciation behind that. It's just too much for me to, like, contend with, and, like, I'm usually one for, like, chaos, so I just think it's on an execution front more so as, like, lack of the chaos landing well in my ears. Instrumentally, I don't really have two notes, because I think I kind of just got sucked into the yodels, for, like, for just for one reason or another. I really did like the bass part at the start. Like, it's very solid, it's very chuggy, and it's like, really setting the foundation for the rest of the track that kind of just veers off into, like, this completely random section. And then at the end, like you get that harmonica solo. I thought that was a nice touch too. But yeah, overall, Space Cowboy, it is my least favorite track. It's it's not a bad track, but it's just not a good track, man. To quote Anthony Fantano.
So basically, what you're saying is like it's not a horrible track, but if you were to listen to this album again, it's probably a skip for you.
Yeah, like on a scale of like 1 to 10, I'll rate this a 5. Like it's not so bad that like it actually angers me. I'm just like, this is just poor execution.
Right, and I think that's what sort of takes it back for me. Like, it feels like if this were to be like a truly funny, like goofy parody song, like they would have put a little bit more effort into it. But as we've been talking about this entire album, it didn't seem like effort was so much a priority as vibes. And again, sort of revolutionary in its own right, but it does have its consequences, and this is kind of one of them. So, moving on from that to the next track, which is Running Away. And I believe, Ryan, I think it's your turn on this one.
It is, and so "Running Away" is the penultimate track on the record here, and yeah, like this was a very interesting track for me. Like, at least, like, upon repeated listens, because the vocals are recorded in such an interesting way. And like they're very playful, and the instrumentals are very playful because you get the da 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 da, like also shout out to the listeners for like putting up with my vocalizations when my voice isn't like 100%. You guys are awesome. But anyway, it's just like I love, like, another moment that I really really did like was the instrumentals, how they kicked off into their own little, like, section after the vocal phrases were done. Like, I thought that was a very nice touch. And then, like, at the end with how the horns are hitting the offbeats, like, I thought that was very nice too. Like, overall though, like, Running Away for me was like, it grew on me upon repeated listens. Like, and it ultimately became my favorite track on the record because, like, it's just such a pleasant track. It's a culmination of, like, a lot of the stuff that I've liked in the record so far, where the vocals are doing a very solid job with a good refrain. And they're adding a nice twist with how they're recorded and how just playful they sound. And then how the instruments are really just, vibing with the vocals, and everything's just vibing together. So, yeah, Running Away is my favorite track on the record.
Completely respectable. As anyone who might be listening is keeping track, I have not revealed the other two songs in my top three, and we're down to two songs, so here we go. I have this at number 3 in my top 3, and for a lot of the reasons you talk about, that trumpet is fantastic on this track. It sounds amazing from start to finish. Whether it be the post-chorus bridges that it plays, or the outro, which again, it hits that really high register and just executes very well. This almost feels like a Sly and the Family Stone track without Sly, or at least a response to Sly in a sense. Particularly in lyrics such as, "The shorter cut is quicker, but ha 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 ha, time is here to stay." Like, we just heard, Sly talk about he doesn't believe time is the answer, and this track saying, well, guess what? It's here to stay, deal with it. And it also feels like a track without Sly because it's a lot more focused. It feels like a classic track that might have been on a album like Stand or even Dance to the Music. And lyrics, such as "Look at you, fooling you," I think also play a role in that. So and I think too, what makes this track feel so fresh is just juxtaposition, because we talked about how murky and uncomfortable Space Cowboy was. Here it feels a lot fresher and a lot more of like a reprieve from that murk. But at the same time, it still has sort of a dark undertone with it, because it feels like, the laughing chants in the choruses are sort of laughing at you. So still dark in its own right, but definitely a lot more upbeat in a sense. And the way that the trumpet sounds mixed with the jagged guitar of did it like to me that was sort of the musical conversation that I picked out from this particular song. So yeah, it's a great song, and it was released as a single, and I think it cracked the top 30. It was like number 23 or something. It peaked at. So deservedly so. This is a great song. I have it at number 3 in my top 3, and I'm glad to hear it was your favorite track.
Yeah, and like I love, like, it's thanks to tracks like this that I really love doing, like, these dissections with you and like these reviews, because I'm like, oh hey, I never heard this song before, and like I could easily like gravitated towards like like Family Affair, or like another Sly and the Family Stone song is like, hey, that's my favorite one, but I'm like, no, actually, Running Away is my favorite, Sly and the Family Stone song. At least, like, as of this moment. But, who knows what's going to happen in a couple of years from now. But, yeah, for lack of a better pivot point here, are you ready to close us out with Thank You for Talking to Me, Africa?
Yes, Thank You for Talking to Me, Africa is the closing track on There's a Riot Going On. And I'm not even going to pretend to play spoiler because, again, math is math. This is my second favorite track on the album. And for a few reasons. Number one, the way it opens is just phenomenal. Just the drums and the bass just very in lock with each other. Larry Graham, who is one of the more underrated bassists of all time. Anyone who like follows bass a little bit probably reveres him as one of the greatest to ever do it. And the way it just has those little like interludes of boo boop 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 boom boom. Like it's jammy without being lack of focus. So I really dig that, and the guitar sounds great too. And this is a track that really sort of elevated itself more that I think about it, because decades before Taylor Swift did it, Sly decided, hey, I'm going to re-record my own music to prove a point. And that's what this song is, because this is technically a cover of himself. So the hit that had been released a year before, which was Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again, that's this song. But it's slowed down. It's very jammy. And it's, the lyrics feel a lot different whenever they're not hyped up by, a very up-tempo funk. Like, this is about as bottom as it gets. And so when you hear lyrics like looking at the devil, grinning at his gun, fingers start shaking, I begin to run, bullets start chasing, I begin to stop, we begin to wrestle, I was on the top. In a much more funkier, like upbeat type of vibe, you don't even like hear the lyrics, you're just dancing too hard. You can't avoid them now. Like, they're right there, and it feels so much darker in this context. And what adds to that is sort of the murkiness of Sly's vocal itself, which is just sort of like drifting all over the place sonically. Like, sometimes it's in focus, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it feels like he's away from the microphone. Sometimes it feels like he's not even on beat. And to me, this sums up this entire record brilliantly. Basically saying, you want the good stuff, you want the classic stuff, here's the classic stuff. I'm going to sing it for you right now. It's going to be different. It's going to be the way I'm doing it. And you're not going to have a say on how it sounds. And despite all of that rebellion from Sly in this move, which again, I think is just fantastically brilliant, it still sounds pretty good, honestly, because again, the rhythm section sounds so good that even when Sly isn't trying, it sounds like he's trying. So that's just a testament to pure musicianship in of itself. So yeah, I think this album strongly closes with a pure statement of, this is how things are now, and if you don't like it, too bad. We're at the end of the record.
So there's not much I can really add to the context of the ending track here that you already didn't throw down. I'll just talk about my own perspective on it. Like, one thing that you didn't touch. I like how it was recorded, in that it just feels like a very open jam session kind of thing. Like, it kind of reminded me not so much in like overall production, but just the way, like the spirit of it, like the opening track off of the Boy Genius record. Like you can just really picture like the whole, like especially in the chorus where they're saying "Thank you for letting me be myself again." Like, and it's just a very jam session. You just picture yourself being in that room with them where it happened. Like I really did like that, and even talking about the vocals there, and like you were talking about like how Sly was coming in and out. Like I really did like that. Like I almost thought it was like multiple singers, like how they were playing off of each other. I thought that was a very nice touch. Vocal screams are always a great highlight for me on the record. But yeah, overall though, it is a solid track, and yeah, what a way to end off the record with just such a conclusive statement. Even just covering like his own track, but in a whole other different manner. So yeah, I'm digging the track. Maybe on another spin, it could have easily popped into like being my other favorite track off the record. But I do dig this track quite a bit.
Again, it's not just that it sounds good, it's a fact that again it makes such a strong statement and does so in a way that again feels I think the only other band that might have tried anything like this up to that point were the Beatles, where they had, Revolution 1 sounding different from Revolution, sounding different from Revolution 9, which we'll maybe tackle that one of these days. But yeah, a strong way to end things, and because we've ended things, there's going to be only one thing to say.
We did it.
We did it. There was a riot going on, and we attended it, I guess. I'm not sure how I was going to finish that, but there it is. So, yeah, what an interesting, weird, bizarre album. I'm going to go ahead and go first with my overall rating. This album is so weird and so groovy and so vibey. Like, this might be the first ever album, like, outside of maybe jazz. And even I wouldn't even throw jazz in there because jazz still has a very, understood focus, even when it's at its most free. Like, this might be the first, like, popular album ever released that's basically fueled by vibes and nothing more. And the vibes are very murky. Sly was on drugs. The band was not cohesive as it usually is. Politics were getting involved. The 70s were changing things around. Technology was coming into the fold. And so all this just sort of created this cataclysmic chaos that was put down for this record. And I've seen people talk about how this sort of triggered an explosion in a more radical type of black music in the 70s, how this led to the likes of, Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, or the stuff from like the OJs of like Backstabbers, some of Stevie Wonder's darkest stuff like Inner Visions. And there is a case to be made that this has sort of fueled that, but it's also just something that may have been a natural occurrence in of itself. And even then, this album stands out for being it almost like it has a focus on being unfocused, which is just nuts. It has a focus on being unfocused. It has a focus on Sly basically saying, listen, I'm Sly. This is my family stone. You like us. You love us. And this is what we're going to put out there. So we'll see how much you like us now. And throughout time, it feels like the response was like, yeah, no, we like this, because it has fueled such a, again, idea of what music can be, what R&B can be, what funk can be. I'm not going to give it a 10 because there's just no possible way I, in my soul, could give this a 10 out of 10. But I respect it for what it is. I respect what Sly was trying to do. So all that being said, I'm going to give this an 8.5 out of 10.
8.5 out of 10. All right. So, my opinions about the record. For me, this is a solid funk album. And I did like the comment that you made of like this album makes it a point of it's focusing on not being focused. For me, like I know I talked about the musical conversations, like the instruments have with one another, and like how some of the songs are pretty standoutish, and some of the vocals are pretty great. Most of the songs are good to great in my opinion. Spaced Cowboy was a swing and a miss in my opinion, and I'm glad that like you can at least understand like the yodels were a little bit too much. But
Yeah.
yeah, just overall though, like if I had to be completely honest with you, the overall package of this record for me came across as a lot of vibey stuff, and it wasn't until I listened in to like pick up on the different instrumental like bits that my appreciation went up for the record. So like overall though, like there's a Riot Going On by Sly and the Family Stone. It's a solid album. I can't really find any fault with it other than the yodels. Overall though, like it's a solid album, like, but like there was like it's just a very vibey kind of album. So like the rating I'm gonna give it a good rating, which is gonna be a solid 7 out of 10. And now if there was like a little bit more done on the instrumental front or on the vocal front, it could have easily popped up. But like I'm standing by my rating. I enjoy the record nonetheless.
That's fair. That's fair. So, between my 8.5 and your 7, it averages out to a 7.75 out of 10 because
Math.
math works for everybody. It's been a while since we've had a relatively funky average like that, which, considering what this album was, appropriate that's funky. So, my next album recommendation for this album, I could go in a couple directions. I almost considered putting Yeezus in this category because this is a sort of a very experimental album in that same vein, but then I would have to actually recommend people listen to Yeezus, and I'm not really in the mood to do that. So I'm going to go back 2 albums, actually 1 album for Sly and the Family Stone, because technically the album in between was a greatest hits album, and I don't count that, even though it's a great record. So the album I'm recommending from Sly and the Family Stone is their 1969 album Stand, which is a great album in and of its own right. It has Everyday People on it, I Want to Take You Higher, the title track, which is also great, a track that I can't even pronounce the name of, which, I can't say because I might get canceled, but it's a nice time. It's a nice time, and it definitely shows the contrast from which Sly and the Family Stone came from that led to this album.
And for me, like, there was one record that came to mind, as I kept, spinning the record, doing drive-bys after drive-bys, and that would be the 2016 release of one Childish Gambino called "Awaken My Love." Probably, my go-to, hey, this is, a really good funk record. Takes a lot of the foundations that Sly was, throwing down on here, and obviously with time and age stuff gets more pronounced. I mean, technology exists for a reason, but everything's just it elevates everything up to a T with the funk records. It's actually been a while since I've listened to that record. It's honestly my favorite Childish Gambino record. I might listen to it later on today, who knows. But yeah, for me, easy recommendation, "Awaken My Love" by Childish Gambino, released in 2016.
So, ladies and gentlemen, if you've not listened to either Stand by Sly and the Family Stone or Awaken My Love by Childish Gambino, those are our recommendations based off of There's a Riot Going On by Sly and the Family Stone. So, we got one more piece of business left to go, Ryan, and we are going into our 3rd week of February, and it is your turn to pick an album.
So, for me, there's an obvious artist that we could cover, but I'm not going to do that because I want to go off the beaten path in terms of what we as a society would consider to be like, traditional, like, African American music. So like, I didn't want to cover a hip hop record. I didn't want to cover an R&B record. I didn't want to do a jazz record. Like, no disrespect to those giants, but like, I just wanted to like go off the beaten path to explore like a different avenue of like, other artists and other bands that have carved out a name for themselves for one reason or another in different genres other than that. So, with that being in mind, I'm going to have you pick between two nouns. Are you ready?
Okay.
Just between two things. So, the two things are vampires or astronauts.
Vampires or astronauts? I oh boy. I don't know where this is gonna go, but I'm just gonna go with astronauts. I'm gonna go with astronauts.
All right. So for our next review, we are going to be covering an album released in 2020. The album is by an artist called Yves Tumor, and the album is called Heaven to a Tortured Mind.
Okay, we are getting in some territory that I am not familiar with at all. So this is gonna be interesting.
Yeah, so, ladies and gentlemen, if you are not familiar with Heaven to a Tortured Mind by Yves Tumor, make sure you check out that album before next week's episode. That way you have opinions about the record, and then you can actually have opinions about the opinions that me and Matt are going to be laying down.
Yes, and I'm curious as to what those opinions are going to be. I'm curious as to what my opinions are going to be because I feel like I'm in for something that might be very, very unfamiliar to me. But such was the case with you on this album with There's a Riot Going On, and we came out on the other side.
So, yeah.